So it's not really systematic. I just try to have some of my reflections on what we have discussed in the last 2 days. So as you can see, our agenda really moved from very broad macroeconomy issues down to very specific. So this is our design. In fact, we really wanted to put agriculture in a broader framework. So macroeconomic issues, then down to the overall growth strategies, then agriculture strategies, social protection, how can we learn from each other. So this is by design. On macro policy issues, so it is clear that a very stable macroeconomic policy are key for promoting growth, for promoting shared growth, and also to protect the poor. So particularly the poor will suffer more during any crisis, during any financial instability. My only wish was that we could discuss a little bit more on how these macro policies have actually affected its agriculture during crisis or during instability. So obviously, exchange rates is one of the probably most critical macro policies that affects agriculture fundamentally. So we do need to have a flexible but manageable exchange rate. So flexible, the country can really adjust during crisis, during sort of unpredicted events. But meantime, we should need the exchange rate determined by the markets. So that actually raised a very good question that we have not discussed much, that is overvalue of exchange rate in many natural resource-rich countries, including Peru, including many African countries. So the agriculture sector really suffered or sacrificed because of the overvaluation of the exchange rate in some of the natural resource countries. Now, this is particularly important in this region because many countries in this region are resources rich. And because of the demand from China and India, the prices of these natural resources are going up. How can we design certain strategies, certain policies that make sure the agriculture sector, agriculture competitive advantage will not lose during commodity boom? So this is one of the questions we have not discussed much. And from my own experience in Africa, like Nigeria, they lost almost 2 decades because of the oil boom. Back in the 70s, 80s, Nigeria was one of the richest countries in Africa. I remember when I studied in Minnesota, I was pretty jealous of my Nigeria classmates because they were paid much higher than we were because they had a rich oil currency. We didn't. But after 20 years, that natural resource boom actually didn't help them. So we call it a natural resource curse. So this is one of the areas we needed to pay more attention to. Then in terms of trade, yes, indeed, we needed to open trade. But we have to make sure certain sectors, certain group of people will have a period of transition so they can really protect it during the open trade. The price volatility has become one of the most critical issues for the last 2 or 3 years, particularly after the financial crisis, after the food crisis. So now we will see higher food prices. We will see high volatile prices. So how do we make sure the poor and the agriculture sector will not suffer from these volatile prices? Because for agriculture sector, for smallholders, my personal position is we do want to see higher agriculture prices, but we want to see a stable higher agriculture prices. So the smallholders, the agriculture sector can benefit from higher prices. So how do we do that? Do we have policies, do we have strategies to stabilize prices maybe at a higher level? We have discussed about the reserves. Do we have optimal strategic reserve at the country level? Can we work together at the regional level to create shared strategic reserve, or even at a global level. So this is one of the issues we have not paid attention to. Then the role of agriculture, or maybe how do I say, how agriculture contributes to high inflation, or vice versa. In fact, in many countries, the higher inflation was caused by agriculture, by shortage of agriculture supply. For example, 2 years ago in Vietnam, because of the shortage in the rice production or in the agriculture production, the CPI or food prices really skyrocketed. And then as a result, the overall inflation has increased. That has caused the overall slowdown of the economic growth. So the role of agriculture in stabilizing the overall economy through stabilized prices is also very important. Then we discussed about saving and spending. Well, this may be not much related to agriculture. So obviously, Asia has a tradition of saving. The Americans, including this region, have a tradition of spending. So how can we really change that sort of behavior or habit or cultural practice? I really don't know. What Xiaobo said, oh, this is sex ratio, that really caused the highest saving. But if you look at the historical figures, the saving rate has been always higher there. Maybe something to do with their tradition, something to do with even the climate, because the monsoon can really lead to the large fluctuation of production. So they need to save. And that sort of a cultural tradition has been there for a long time. So that's one of the areas we needed to look at, particularly what the international regulation we should have to ensure that the Chinese Asians will spend and this region will save, particularly in America. Then in terms of overall growth, and I also wished that we could focus a little bit on the pattern of the growth, not only higher growth, stabilized growth. Yes, indeed, stabilized growth, higher growth, almost a necessary condition for poverty reduction, for overall improvement of well-being. But the pattern of the growth really matters. The composition of growth. Where does your growth come from? Is it from agriculture sector, from service sector? Is your growth coming from small holders? Or is your growth coming from even small business in the non-agriculture sector? As I remember, back in 1997, 1998, during the Asian financial crisis, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and to some extent South Korea had done a much better job than other economies because their economy was dominated by smallholders. So not necessarily smallholders, small businesses. So small businesses have a very wide network of family ties, and they are very easy to adjust, and they can recover. They can respond to crises very quickly. So the pattern of the growth, whether it's in terms of size, in terms of composition of the sector, really matter. Then the financial crisis. So during the financial crisis, what is the role of the agriculture sector? That we have not heard much. But from my own understanding is, in many cases, the agriculture sector suffered much less or even continued to increase during the financial crisis. And the agriculture sector provided a buffer for poor migrants who returned from the urban center to their hometown. So that again helped to stabilize the whole society. So I just cannot imagine during the financial crisis, the 30 million of Chinese migrants suddenly didn't have any place to go. So they went to their hometown, so they had their family network over there. They also had their land there. So without that sort of agriculture sector as a safety net, I just couldn't imagine what a society would look like. Well, also in terms of overall growth strategy, I think we went to different stages from input substitution to export net. And now we're arguing for domestic net. Yes, domestic net is very important. How do we promote domestic net, particularly in some of the larger countries like China, India? In the case of China, the large rural and urban gap, so 4 or 5 times per capita income in rural area than in urban area than rural area. It is a challenge, but on the other hand, it provides a great opportunity to use domestic net strategy. Then the difference between the east and the coast, again, the income could be 3 times higher. So these 2 large gaps between rural and urban, between west and the east, can provide a tremendous opportunity to use domestic net strategy. But that will not come automatically. So the investment, credit policy, sort of migration policy. So we are really encouraged to narrow the gap between these 2 gaps. Then in terms of agricultural development strategy, I think Ashok did a pretty good job to compare these 2 regions. I don't want to repeat what he has said. In terms of supply chain, I think the Michael Carter raised a very good question. In some of the cases here in Latin America, yes, indeed, there's a risk that smallholders may not be able to benefit from that. But we also heard different stories, particularly one of the studies Alberta has been doing 4 or 5 country cases. So the smallholders were able to join the supply chain, but also indirectly, the poor will benefit from that through neighbor markets. So we should not ignore the neighbor market effects. So in many cases, okay, the large firms, large commercial farms, yes, are able to use the supply chains to link their production to supermarkets and to export markets. But don't forget, many of this high-value production is labor-intensive. So they hire laborers from the surrounding areas, surrounding neighborhoods. So that sort of neighbor markets, even overall general equilibrium effects have not been captured through the supply chain. Then asset distribution to promote the more equitable agricultural growth. This is also very much linked to the next section, the social protection. Yeah, indeed, we have seen some of the asset transfer programs, particularly in Africa. So in Nigeria, the World Bank have supported a couple of large programs to transfer the assets to smallholders, irrigation facilities, mechanization facilities. Yes, indeed, in some cases it worked, but could be better. One of the reasons that sort of transfer program didn't work well is the lack of public services in rural areas. Yes, okay, farmers received a machine, small equipment for irrigation, but without improved public services, it's extension services, technology services, market services, even they have the assets, that impact will be very small. So the combination of asset transfer together with improved rural public services probably will increase your returns much bigger than just simply the asset transfer. We have seen that when the farmers receive certain assets, they either sell them to other farmers. If it's in the case of livestock, they just slaughter the livestock, they consume it. So without really generating a much bigger long-term impact. Then on institutions, I think one of the issues we have not discussed is what the role of the local institutions, local organizations that have played to use the supply chains to benefit smallholders. Again, coming back to my home country in China, the connectives begin to arrive again during this sort of the booming of supply chains. Because smallholders just cannot deal with large firms. Large firms also don't want to deal with small farmers who have, let's say, 0.5 hectares of land. So what is the solution? Well, farmers can organize themselves. So the connectives come back again. So the farmers organize to a larger scale. So the firms deal with the connectives or deal with farmer organizations, so not one-to-one. So in this case, the firms reduce their transaction cost. And farmers' organizations can represent farmers better. So when they negotiate contracts with large firms, then they will be able to increase their voice, their bargaining power. So some of these innovations we really need to look into. Then social protection. Yes, it is true that this region has spent a large amount of government expenditure on social protection. I think the social protection itself is endogenized, it's economic phenomena. It really depends on stages of development, many of you have mentioned. But also it really depends on the structure of the economy. So obviously, when the majority of the people are poor, the targeting doesn't make any sense. Protection doesn't make any sense. So broader-based growth is critical to move everybody up. But as the economy begins to move to a more mature stage, and as the whole society becomes more unequal, then targeting becomes very important. Then in a society where you have a dual system, okay, large commercial sector and a smallholder, either business or small farmers. So it's easier to target, and it's easier to identify the poor people. So targeting may make more sense. So the social protection really depends on the stages of development, depends on the structure of the society. Then I think the policies with regard to social exclusion is really a crucial one. Almost in all kinds of societies, you have exclusion problem. So here, exclusion may occur to indigenous people, in India to a lower caste, in China to minority. So targeting the social excluded groups, so not only it's a right by itself, but in many cases could also correct the market failure. So you improve efficiency, right? So the workers should be hired based on their ability, not based on their class, their caste, or their ethnicity. Then I also very much like the promoting the culture of evaluation of social protection. I think this region is quite open in terms of accepting the evaluation. So in Asia, we really need to learn how do we can really use the evaluation to improve our efficiency of targeting. I also encourage the experiments. So there are many kinds of social protection schemes. Many work, many fail. And somebody said that it's rather difficult to transfer certain schemes from one country to another, from one region to another. But can we do some experiments? I mean, China's experience in rural reform illustrated that, okay, you start from low skill, isolated place to experiment. Try to learn whether it worked or how it worked. Then we scale them up in a large scale. So experiments is very, very critical. Then on trade and investment, I really enjoyed Anton and David's study. So evidence-based, so knowledge-based. So we can really use this information and knowledge during our negotiation. So one of the questions I have is, unilateral trade reform. So we have discussed about regional or even global multilateral reforms. What about unilateral? Have we done a good job in terms of evaluating the benefits of unilateral trade reform? Again, coming back to China, China voluntarily reformed its trade after the reform. Nobody pressed them. But China really benefited from that trade reform. So I think as a research institution like IFPRI and the University of Pacific, we needed to bring that knowledge out. If we reform our own trade system, probably it's going to do good for us. Now for China, China has become so big. Now China's problem is world problem. China becomes the world becomes China. So in this case, yes, indeed, unilateral trade reform by China not only benefits China, but also the whole world. So we need to bring this knowledge out. Trade obviously is not going to benefit everybody equally. So how can we design certain investment strategies, set the right priorities to use our money more effectively to protect the poor during the trade reform, during the trade liberalization is key. I think somebody mentioned about the opportunity cost of social protection versus investment. Yes, indeed. This is one of the issues we really needed to address. So not only just the returns in terms of productive investment, but also compare that with the social protection. So in long run, which one is more effective? In long run, which one will not cause macro imbalances? In long run, which one will lead to a much better development outcome? I'm not going to, well, Raju is raising hands there, so he reminds me I should finish. But in terms of way forward, I just remind you that when we did this dragon elephant study in China and India, indeed, yes, we try to focus on some broad issues first, as a first step to identify certain areas we can really work on. And second step, we move to in-depth study around each topic, regional inequality, supply chains, local governance, investment priorities. So indeed, we move down to the second step to focus on each topic, each issue, how we can learn together. And our experience there is we bring one scholar from each country to work on the same topic, to debate, to discuss, and draw the lessons we can really learn from each other. So finally, I wanted to make another important point, that is networking. So this is probably one of the biggest events we have had in Latin America. We have brought so many scholars from China, from India, from Bangladesh. I think this networking, to bring everybody together, just cannot be underestimated. So that impact you will see, as I observed between China and India. So the scholars really become a family of a network. So for that, I think that in the future, we can really further engage more sort of research topics, policy dialogues, or even trade negotiations through this network. Okay, thank you very much.